They called her the heavy burden of the Silver Lake Pack. Sarah Miller spent 22 years apologizing for taking up space, convinced by her own mother that her size made her unlovable and her wolf weak. When her mother, the High Priestess Regina, finally decided to get rid of her, she didn't just exile her. She sent Sarah to the Blackwood Triplets, the most feared feral alphas in the North, as a sick joke. It was meant to be a punishment, a death sentence. But Regina made a fatal miscalculation. She thought she was feeding a lamb to the slaughter. She didn't realize she was handing 3 starving kings the one thing they would burn the world down to keep. This is the story of how a punishment became a dynasty. The dress didn't fit. It never fit. Sarah Miller stood on the raised podium in the center of the fitting room, holding her breath until her lungs burned. The seamstress, a petite woman named Mrs. Gable, with a mouthful of pins, sighed loudly. It wasn't a sigh of exhaustion. It was a sigh of judgment. She tugged at the zipper on the back of the silk gown, the fabric straining against Sarah's soft curves. "If you could just suck it in, Sarah." Mrs. Gable mumbled the pins, muffling her words. "I am," Sarah whispered, staring at her reflection. She had beautiful eyes, an unusual violet shade, inherited from a grandmother she never met, but she rarely looked at them. She only looked at what everyone else saw: the roundness of her stomach, the thickness of her thighs, the way she didn't look like the lithe, athletic she-wolves that populated the Silver Lake Pack. The door to the fitting room slammed open. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Regina Miller, the High Priestess of the Pack, and Sarah's mother walked in. She was a woman carved from ice and marble, tall, painfully thin, and radiating a dominance that made the air heavy. She didn't look at Sarah's face. She looked immediately at the strained zipper. "Rip it out," Regina said, her voice devoid of emotion. "Ma'am?" the seamstress asked, trembling. "The dress, it's ruined. She's stretched the structure beyond repair. Take it off her before she bursts the seams and costs me another $2,000. Sarah felt the familiar sting of tears, but swallowed them down. Crying only made her face puffy, which Regina hated even more. She stepped down, allowing the dress to pool at her feet, leaving her standing in her simple cotton undergarments. She crossed her arms over her chest, trying to make herself small. "Get dressed in your street clothes," Regina commanded, turning her back. "And come to my office. We are done pretending you can fit into society." 10 minutes later, Sarah sat in the leather chair opposite her mother's massive mahogany desk. The office smelled of expensive lilies and sanitizer. "I have secured an alliance," Regina said, not looking up from her paperwork. Sarah's heart skipped. An alliance usually meant a marriage. But who would Regina marry her off to? The pack members usually treated Sarah as invisible at best, and a cautionary tale at worst. An alliance with who? The Blackwood Pack. Sarah went cold. The Blackwood Pack wasn't just a pack, it was a ghost story. Located in the deep, frigid forests of the Canadian North, they were rumored to be savages. The pack was run by the Blackwood Triplets, Kieran Lachlan and Eamon. Rumors said they shared everything. Rumors said they had killed their own father to take power. Rumors said they were more wolf than human, incapable of love or reason. "Mother," Sarah stammered, her hands gripping the armrests. "The Blackwoods, they kill outsiders." Regina finally looked up. Her eyes were the same violet as Sarah's, but hard as diamonds. "They requested a breeder, someone of high lineage, but low value, someone they wouldn't have to treat with respect. They need heirs, and they don't care about the mother's appearance or social standing." The words hit Sarah like physical blows. Breeder. Low value. "I sent them your photo," Regina continued, pulling a file out. "The one from the summer solstice where you looked particularly vast. I told them you were obedient, fertile, and that I wanted nothing in return except for them to never send you back." "You're selling me," Sarah's voice cracked, "to the triplets." "I am disposing of a liability, Sarah," Regina said, closing the file. "You have been a stain on my reputation since you presented as an Omega. You don't shift properly. You eat too much. You are soft in a world that requires steel. The Blackwoods agreed to take you. A car will be here in 1 hour." 1 hour? Sarah stood up, panic rising in her throat. "But do not embarrass me, Sarah." Regina snapped, her voice dropping into an alpha command that forced Sarah to sit back down against her will. "You will go. You will serve them. And you will likely die there, cold and forgotten. But at least you will finally be useful to this pack." Regina looked at her daughter one last time, her lip curling slightly. "Pack your bags. Only the essentials. I doubt clothes in your size exist where you're going anyway." Sarah walked out of the office, her legs numb. She didn't cry. The shock was too deep for tears. She went to her room, grabbed a duffel bag, and packed the few things that brought her comfort. Her sketchbook, a worn copy of Pride and Prejudice, and her oversized hoodies. She looked around her room, the room she had grown up in, isolated and lonely, and realized she wasn't leaving a home. She was escaping a prison. She just didn't know if she was walking into an execution chamber. The drive north took 14 hours. The private driver, a silent man named Greg, didn't speak a word to her. As the landscape shifted from the manicured suburbs of the Silver Lake territory to the jagged, imposing pines of the north, the sky turned a bruised purple. Snow began to fall thick and heavy, despite it only being October. Sarah clutched her sketchbook to her chest. She had spent the drive imagining her fate. Would they lock her in a dungeon? Would they force her to run as a wolf in the snow until she froze? She looked down at her body. She was soft. She bruised easily. She wouldn't survive a week in the wild. The car slowed as it approached a massive iron gate flanked by stone pillars. The Blackwood crest, a 3-headed wolf, was etched into the metal. The gates groaned open, and the car wound up a long, dark driveway lined with ancient trees that seemed to whisper warnings in the wind. The house was a fortress. It was a sprawling structure of black stone and timber, built into the side of a mountain. It looked impenetrable. The car stopped. "Get out," Greg said. It was the first thing he'd said all day. Sarah grabbed her duffel bag. The moment she stepped out, the cold bit through her thin coat, sinking into her bones. The car immediately reversed and sped away, the tail lights disappearing into the gloom. She was alone. She stood at the bottom of the massive stone stairs leading to the double doors. She took a breath, trying to summon a shred of the courage she read about in her books. "Just survive," she told herself. "Keep your head down. Do what they say." Before she could knock, the heavy doors swung open. 3 men stood in the entryway. Sarah's breath hitched. The rumors had called them monsters. They had left out the part about them being gods. They were identical, yet distinct. They all stood well over 6'4", with broad shoulders that strained against their dark Henley shirts. They had hair as black as raven feathers, and skin that looked like it had been kissed by the harsh northern sun. The one in the middle stepped forward. This was clearly Kieran. His energy was sharp, commanding. He looked at her with eyes that were a startling, glowing amber. "You're late," he growled. His voice was a low rumble that vibrated in Sarah's chest. The snow," Sarah managed to whisper, gripping her bag until her knuckles turned white. The one to the left, Lachlan tilted his head. He had a scar running through his eyebrow and a wilder, more restless energy. He sniffed the air, his eyes widening slightly. "She smells like rain and vanilla." The third brother, Eamon, wore glasses which seemed incongruous with the raw muscle of his frame. He was looking at her not with aggression, but with intense, analytical curiosity. "You are Regina's daughter." "Yes," Sarah said, looking at her boots. "I'm Sarah." "You're soaking wet." Kieran noted his tone unreadable. "And you're shaking." "I'm fine." Sarah lied, though her teeth were beginning to chatter. She expected them to laugh, to tell her to sleep in the barn, to make a joke about how much space she took up on the porch. Instead, Kieran moved. He moved faster than a human eye could track. In a split second, he was in front of her. The heat radiating off him was like a furnace. He didn't strike her. He reached out and took the heavy duffel bag from her hand. "Get inside," Kieran ordered, but the harshness was gone from his voice, replaced by a strange urgency. "Lachlan, shut the door. Eamon, get the fire roaring in the great hall." Sarah froze. I can carry my own bag." Kieran looked down at her. Up close, he was terrifyingly large. He loomed over her, but his amber eyes swept over her face, pausing on her lips, then her eyes. "I do not let guests freeze on my doorstep. Move, Sarah." She hurried inside, the warmth of the house enveloping her. The interior was rustic but opulent, huge bear-skin rugs, leather furniture, and a fireplace large enough to roast an ox. "Stand there," Lachlan said, pointing to the hearth. "You're turning blue." Sarah stood by the fire, the heat stinging her frozen skin. The three brothers formed a semicircle around her, cutting off any escape route. She felt like a specimen under a microscope. She waited for the insults. She waited for them to ask why her mother had sent a fat Omega instead of a warrior. "She's terrified," Eamon murmured to his brothers. "Look at her heart rate. She thinks we're going to eat her." "I don't think you're going to eat me," Sarah said, finding a sudden spark of defiance. If she was going to die, she wouldn't die cowering. "I think you're going to use me as a breeder and then discard me." "That's what my mother said." The room went deadly silent. The fire crackled and the sound like a gunshot in the quiet. Kieran dropped her bag. The thud echoed. He took a step closer to her, invading her personal space until she had to crane her neck to look him in the eye. "A breeder." Kieran repeated his voice, dangerously soft. "Is that what she told you?" She said I was of low value." Sarah's voice trembled, the shame burning her cheeks. "That you needed heirs and didn't care what the mother looked like." A growl ripped through the room, but it didn't come from Kieran alone. It came from all three of them. It was a primal, guttural sound of pure rage. Lachlan punched the stone wall next to the fireplace. A crack appeared in the masonry. "I'm going to kill that woman," he snarled. "I'm going to march south and tear her throat out." Sarah flinched, stepping back toward the fire. I'm sorry, I'm not what you wanted, not what we wanted." Eamon stepped in, pushing past Kieran to look Sarah in the face. He reached out his large, rough hand, hovering near her cheek, before gently, so gently, it made her heart stop tucking a wet strand of hair behind her ear. "Sarah," Eamon said, his voice shaking with restrained emotion. We didn't ask for a breeder. We asked for a treaty meeting. Your mother offered you up like a sacrifice. We accepted because we saw your photo." Sarah blinked, confused. "My photo? The one where I looked huge?" Kieran let out a huff of air that might have been a laugh if he wasn't so angry. "The one where you looked like a goddess, surrounded by plastic dolls," he corrected. He stepped closer, sandwiching her between himself and the fire. He leaned down his nose, brushing against her neck, inhaling deeply. Sarah stiffened, but her inner wolf, usually dormant and quiet, suddenly woke up. It howled. It didn't howl in fear. It howled in recognition. "You are not a breeder, Sarah," Kieran whispered against her skin, sending shivers down her spine that had nothing to do with the cold. "And you are certainly not of low value." He pulled back, his amber eyes burning with possessiveness. "You are a mate." The world tilted on its axis. Sarah stared at them. Mate. It was impossible. Mates were cherished. Mates were perfect. Triplet alphas didn't mate with rejected omegas. "You're mocking me," she whispered, tears finally spilling over. "Please don't mock me." "We aren't mocking you," Lackland said, his voice raw. He dropped to his knees in front of her, an alpha kneeling before an omega, and began to unlace her wet boots. "We've been waiting for you for 28 years, and if Regina Miller ever tries to touch you again, we will burn her entire pack to ash." Sarah stood there, the fire warming her back, while the most dangerous men in the world looked at her as if she were the only source of light in the room. For the first time in her life, she wasn't taking up too much space. She was exactly where she was meant to be. But deep down, fear lingered. Things that seemed too good to be true usually were. And Regina Miller never let go of her possessions that easily. The silence in the great hall following Lackland's declaration was heavier than the snow falling outside. Mates. The word hung in the smoky air, a promise and a threat all at once. Sarah stared at Lackland, who was still kneeling, holding her freezing foot in his blistering hot hands. She pulled her foot back sharply, scrambling backward until her spine hit the rough stone of the fireplace hearth. "No," she whispered, shaking her head rapidly. "No, that's not funny. Don't joke about that." Kieran let out a low rumble of frustration, raking a hand through his dark hair. "Do we look like men who joke, Sarah? But I'm—" She gestured vaguely at herself, at the damp clothes clinging to her soft figure, the figure her mother despised. "I'm an omega, a flawed one, and you three you're the Blackwood kings. You don't mate with people like me. You mate with warrior she-wolves, or powerhouse diplomats." Eamon stepped forward, pushing his glasses up his nose. His analytical gaze felt less invasive now, more like he was trying to solve a complex equation, where she was the variable. "Biologically speaking," Eamon said quietly, "the mate bond doesn't care about social hierarchy or body mass index. It cares about genetic compatibility and soul resonance. When Kieran smelled you, our inner wolves didn't see Regina's daughter. They saw home. We've been going out of our minds for the last hour," Lackland admitted. Standing up, he seemed restless, vibrating with excess energy. "Since we scented you crossing our border lines, we thought we were being attacked. We didn't realize we were just desperate." Kieran extended a hand to her. "Come. You need dry clothes. You need food. And you need to stop looking at us like we're going to strike you." Sarah hesitated. Every instinct honed over 22 years under Regina's roof told her this was a trap. Kindness was always a prelude to cruelty. But the cold was seeping back into her bones, and the heat radiating from the 3 behemoths before her was intoxicating. She took Kieran's hand. His grip was firm, swallowing her smaller hand completely. They didn't take her to a guest room. They led her up a sweeping staircase made of split logs and iron down a long corridor, decorated with ancient tribal tapestries, to a set of massive double doors at the end of the hall. Kieran pushed the doors open. It wasn't a room, it was a wing. The master suite was larger than the entire first floor of her mother's house. It was dominated by a bed that seemed impossibly big, easily 10 feet wide, covered in thick furs and heavy wool blankets. A roaring fireplace sat opposite the bed. One wall was entirely glass, looking out into the blizzard. "This is... Where do I sleep?" Sarah asked, clutching her sketchbook tightly. "Here," Lackland said, already pulling a thick grey sweater over his head and tossing it onto a leather chair. His torso was a landscape of lean muscle and scattered scars. Sarah quickly averted her eyes, blushing furiously. "With all of you," Sarah squeaked. "We are mates, Sarah," Kieran said, walking toward a door that presumably led to a closet. "We sleep together. We eat together. We bleed together. That is how it works." "But I don't know you," she cried out, the panic finally overriding her fear of them. "You can't just claim me and expect me to hop into bed with 3 strangers I don't even know. Which one of you is the oldest?" The brothers stopped moving. They exchanged a look, a silent, lightning-fast communication that passed between them. Eamon stepped forward slowly, hands raised in a placating gesture. "She's right. We are moving at alpha speed. She is running on trauma speed. We're scaring her." Kieran stopped his back to her. He took a deep breath, his shoulders rising and falling. When he turned, the intense predatory amber glow in his eyes had dimmed slightly to a warmer golden brown. "My apologies," Kieran said stiffly. Apologies clearly didn't come easily to him. "I am Kieran. I am the eldest by 4 minutes. I handle the pack's politics and defense." He pointed to the scarred brother. "Lachlan is the middle. He manages our territory and the hunting patrols. He is reactive." "I'm right here, asshole," Lachlan grumbled, but he tugged a clean t-shirt on, covering himself. "And Eamon is the youngest," Kieran finished. "He manages the pack's finances and logistics. He's the brains. We're just the muscle." "That's an oversimplification," Eamon noted dryly, "but accurate enough for tonight." He looked at Sarah gently. "The bathroom is through there. It's stocked with everything you need. Lock the door if it makes you feel safer. We will not enter. Tonight you sleep in the bed. We will take the couches in the sitting area." You'd do that?" Sarah asked, surprised. The bed was clearly theirs. "We would sleep on the snow outside if it made you comfortable." Lachlan said, his voice thick with emotion he was trying to suppress. "Just go get warm. Please. You smell like sadness, and it's making my wolf want to tear the house down." Sarah retreated into the bathroom. It was opulent, featuring a sunken stone tub big enough for 4 people. She locked the door, trembling. She stripped off her wet clothes and caught sight of herself in the floor-to-ceiling mirror. Regina's voice echoed in her head. "Disgusting. No alpha will ever want that soft belly. You look like dough left out in the rain." She hated her body. She hated that it didn't look like the hard, athletic bodies of the she-wolves in magazines. And now she was supposed to present this body to 3 near-perfect physical specimens. She sank into the hot water, letting the tears finally come. She cried for the girl she had been, the one who just wanted her mother to love her. And she cried out of fear of the hope that was blooming in her chest. What if they were real? What if this wasn't a trick? When she emerged an hour later, wrapped in a plush black robe she found hanging on a hook, it smelled faintly of cedar and spice, Kieran's scent. The bedroom was dim. The brothers made good on their promise. They were in the adjoining sitting area. Kieran was reading documents by firelight. Lachlan was pacing, staring out the snowy window. Eamon was on a laptop. They all looked up instantly when she entered. The intensity of 3 pairs of eyes focused solely on her was overwhelming. "Better?" Eamon asked gently. "Yes." "Thank you," Sarah whispered. She clutched the lapels of the robe tight, conscious of her nakedness underneath. Kieran stood up. He walked toward her. He didn't stop until he was a foot away. He reached out and Sarah flinched violently, squeezing her eyes shut, expecting a blow or a pinch the way Regina used to correct her posture. Kieran froze. His hand hovered in the air. A growl built in his chest, low and vibrating. "Who hit you?" he demanded. The rage in his voice was volcanic. Sarah opened her eyes. "No one. I mean, my mother didn't hit me. Not really. Just corrections." "Corrections," Lachlan spat from across the room. "Treating a child like a doll's being broken." Kieran slowly lowered his hand. "Sarah, look at me." She forced herself to meet his gaze. "No one in this house will ever raise a hand to you in anger." Kieran vowed. It sounded like a blood oath. "You are safe here. You are cherished here. It is going to take time for you to believe that. We have time. We're not going anywhere." He stepped aside, gesturing to the massive bed. "Sleep. We'll be right here." Sarah climbed into the massive bed. The sheets were flannel and incredibly soft. It smelled like them, a mix of forest cold air and male musk. It was the most comforting scent she had ever experienced. She thought she would lie awake for hours, terrified. But exhausted by the drive, the emotional whiplash and the warmth, she was asleep within minutes. She didn't see Kieran quietly walk over and sit in the armchair next to the bed, watching her chest rise and fall, guarding her sleep like a dragon, guarding its hoard for the entire night. The first week at the Blackwood estate passed in a strange liminal haze. Sarah felt like she was living inside a snow globe, protected, insulated, but entirely separate from the real world. The brothers were intense. There was no other word for it. They didn't know how to do things halfway. If Eamon made her breakfast, it wasn't toast. It was a gourmet omelette with ingredients imported from the city. If Lachlan took her for a walk to see the grounds, it wasn't a stroll. It was a perimeter check, where he practically snarled at a squirrel that got too close to her. Kieran was the hardest to read. He was busy running the pack during the day, but whenever he was in the house, his eyes were on her, tracking her movements, assessing her mood. It was suffocating, but also in a deep, dark part of her, thrilling to be the center of someone's world instead of on the periphery. The biggest hurdle was the pack itself. The Blackwood pack was known for being insular and rough. They were warriors living in harsh conditions. On Saturday, Kieran announced that she would be formally introduced at the evening meal in the communal dining hall. "Do I have to?" Sarah asked, wringing her hands over her stomach. They were in the kitchen. She was wearing one of Eamon's cashmere sweaters that came down to her knees. "They need to know they're Luna," Kieran said, not looking up from the tablet he was reading. "They're going to hate me," Sarah mumbled. "They're expecting a warrior queen. They're going to get Mimi." Lachlan, who was sharpening a hunting knife at the counter, slammed the blade down. "If anyone disrespects you, I will remove their tongue." "That's not helping, Lachlan," Sarah cried out. "You can't just hurt people into liking me." "Actually, in this pack, that's exactly how it works," Lachlan countered. Eamon sighed, taking the knife away from his brother. "What Lachlan means is that our endorsement is absolute. They will accept you because you are ours. But Sarah, you must understand. You are not what Regina made you believe you are." He walked over to her, turning her gently toward the reflection in the oven door. "Look at yourself. Since you arrived, your scent has sweetened. Your skin is clear. You are not a fat Omega. You are a healthy wolf who was starved of affection and kept in a constant state of high cortisol stress by an abusive mother. Your body held on to weight as a defense mechanism. You are beautiful, Sarah, and you are powerful. You just don't know it yet." Sarah looked at her reflection. She didn't see what he saw. She still saw the girl who took up too much space in the fitting room. But she nodded. She had to try. The dinner was terrifying. The dining hall was filled with 200 hardened shifters. When the triplets walked in with Sarah flanked between Kieran and Lachlan, the room went dead silent. Sarah kept her eyes on the floor, feeling the weight of hundreds of judgmental stares. "This is Sarah." Kieran's voice boomed through the hall. It wasn't an introduction. It was a proclamation. "She is our mate. She is your Luna. You will offer her the same loyalty you offer us. Anyone who fails to do so will answer to me." There was a beat of silence, and then slowly the pack began to thump their fists on the wooden tables. A sign of respect. It wasn't warm, but it was acceptance. Sarah let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. But the real world couldn't be held back forever. 2 days later, Sarah was in the library, sketching the view of the mountains, when the security intercom buzzed. "Alpha Kieran." The gate guard's voice crackled. "There is a vehicle here from Silver Lake territory. A Ms. Jessica Croft. She says she's here to bring belongings for Lady Sarah." Sarah dropped her charcoal stick. Jessica Croft, the beta's daughter from her old pack. They had been friends as children before Jessica realized that being nice to Sarah was social suicide in Regina's court. Jessica had become one of Regina's primary lackeys, earning favor by reporting on Sarah's failures. Kieran, who had been working at a desk in the corner, was beside her in an instant. "You know her. We grew up together," Sarah stammered. A cold pit formed in her stomach. Regina hadn't forgotten her. "Do you want to see her?" Kieran asked. "Say the word and I'll have her turned away." Sarah wanted to say yes. She wanted to hide in this glass house forever. But if she sent Jessica away, Regina would just send someone worse, or come herself. "Let her in," Sarah whispered. Jessica was brought into the main sitting room 20 minutes later. She looked out of place in the rustic fortress, dressed in designer jeans and a flimsy silk top meant for a much warmer climate. She carried a small, expensive-looking gift bag. Jessica's eyes widened when she saw Sarah sitting on the plush leather sofa, flanked by Kieran and Lachlan, with Eamon leaning on the mantelpiece behind her. The display of unified power was staggering. "Sarah," Jessica exclaimed, rushing forward to give her a stiff air-kiss hug. She reeked of expensive perfume that clashed with the wood smoke scent of the house. "Oh my God, look at you. You look well-fed." It was a subtle dig one only Sarah would understand. You got fat again." Kieran growled low in his throat. Jessica froze, eyeing the massive alpha nervously. "Regina was so worried." Jessica continued, her voice pitching higher. "When she didn't hear from you, she thought, well, you know how fragile you can be. She sent me to bring you your vitamins." She pulled a bottle of diet pills from the gift bag, the same pills Regina had forced Sarah to take since she was 16. They made her heart race and her hands shake, but they never made her thin. Sarah stared at the bottle. It was a symbol of her leash. Lachlan moved. He snatched the bottle from Jessica's hand before Sarah could touch it. He read the label, his sneer deepening. "Phentermine, caffeine, diuretics. You're poisoning her." "It's just to help her manage her condition," Jessica said defensively, stepping back. "Sarah doesn't have a condition," Eamon said coldly from the fireplace. "She was malnourished." Jessica looked panicky now. Her mission was failing. She looked at Sarah, her eyes pleading. "Sarah, please. Your mother just wants what's best for you. She misses you. She's been crying every day." Sarah almost laughed. Regina crying. It was biologically impossible. She didn't seem sad when she told me I was a liability and shipped me here, Sarah said, her voice quiet but steady. Jessica's demeanor hardened. The nice act evaporated. "Look, Sarah, don't get too comfortable here. You really think 3 alphas like this want you forever? Regina knows what they're doing. They're just using you to secure their borders because they know Regina is powerful. Once they have what they want, they'll toss you aside, just like everyone else." She leaned in close, dropping her voice so the brothers wouldn't hear, though with their hearing it was futile. "Everyone knows their real mate died 5 years ago in the Rogue Wars. You're just a placeholder, Sarah. A warm body until they find someone better. Come home before you get humiliated." The words hit Sarah like poisoned darts. A dead mate. They had never mentioned that. Jessica smirked, seeing the doubt cloud Sarah's eyes. She turned to leave. "I'll tell Regina you're adjusting. Good luck, Sarah. You're going to need it." Lachlan escorted Jessica out none too gently. The door slammed shut, leaving a deafening silence in the room. Sarah sat frozen on the couch. The insecurity that had started to recede came rushing back like a tidal wave. A placeholder, a second choice. Kieran knelt in front of her, taking her cold hands in his. "Sarah, look at me." "Is it true?" she whispered, her violet eyes filling with tears. "Did your mate die?" Kieran squeezed her hands tight, his jaw working. Jessica lied. "We have never been mated before. You are the first. You are the only." But why would she say that? Because Regina knows exactly where to insert the knife to make you bleed the most, Eamon said softly. "She is trying to break your bond with us before it fully cements. She's afraid, Sarah. Afraid of what you will become with us at your back." Sarah looked at the 3 men surrounding her. They looked sincere. They looked pained by her doubt, but 22 years of conditioning didn't vanish in a week. The seed of doubt had been planted, and now it began to take root. The seed Jessica had planted didn't just take root. It grew into a tangled vine that choked Sarah's newfound confidence. Placeholder. The word echoed in her mind every time Kieran touched her back, every time Eamon smiled at her over his coffee, every time Lachlan brought her a wildflower from his patrol. "They don't love you," the voice in her head whispered. "They are grieving someone else, and you are just the soft, convenient body they are using to fill the void." For 3 days, Sarah withdrew. She stopped eating the elaborate meals Eamon prepared, claiming she wasn't hungry. She locked the bathroom door for hours. She slept on the far edge of the massive bed, curled into a tight ball, flinching if their skin brushed hers in the night. The brothers noticed. The atmosphere in the house shifted from a warm sanctuary to a tense waiting room. They tried to coax her out of it. Lachlan brought her chocolate. Kieran tried to engage her in debates about pack politics. Eamon offered to read to her, but she remained distant, her violet eyes dull and guarded. On the fourth afternoon, the brothers were called away to the border to deal with a rogue bear sighting. Sarah was alone in the fortress for the first time since her arrival. She knew she shouldn't snoop, but the doubt was eating her alive. She needed to know who the dead mate was. She needed to see the woman she was failing to replace. She wandered the hallways until she reached the west wing. It was the only part of the house she hadn't been invited into. The door was heavy oak, but unlike the other doors, it wasn't locked. It was just heavy, as if weighted down by memory. She pushed it open. The air inside was stale and cold. The furniture was covered in white dust sheets. It looked like a museum exhibit of a life interrupted. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs as she walked further in. On the mantelpiece of the cold fireplace, there were no sheets. There was a shrine, dozens of framed photographs. Sarah stepped closer, her breath hitching. The photos were of a girl. She looked young, vibrant, with dark hair and bright, laughing eyes. In one photo, she was sandwiched between the triplets, who looked much younger, perhaps teenagers. They were laughing, their arms wrapped protectively around her. In another photo, the girl was older, looking solemn, and she was soft. She wasn't a warrior. She had curves. She had a round face. She looked startlingly like Sarah. Tears welled in Sarah's eyes. It's true, she thought, her chest caving in. They had a mate. She looked like me. That's why they wanted me. I'm just a copy. Get out! The voice was a low thunderclap. Sarah spun around. Kieran stood in the doorway. He was still wearing his patrol gear covered in snow and mud. His face was a mask of terrifying fury. Behind him, Lachlan and Eamon appeared, their expressions equally dark. I didn't, Sarah stammered, backing up until she hit the mantel. A picture frame wobbled. We told you this wing was private, Lachlan snarled, stepping into the room. The playful brother was gone. This was the predator. You have no right to be in here. I have a right to know who she is, Sarah yelled back. The fear giving way to a desperate, aching heartbreak. She grabbed the photo of the girl. Jessica was right. You did have a mate. You lied to me. You're just using me to replace her. The silence that followed was suffocating. Eamon walked forward, his movements slow and deliberate. He gently took the photo from Sarah's trembling hands. He looked at the image of the girl, and his expression crumbled from anger into profound grief. This is not our mate, Sarah, Eamon said quietly. Don't lie to me, Sarah sobbed. She looks just like me. You bought me from my mother because I remind you of her. She is our sister, Kieran said. His voice was cracked, stripped of its usual command. Sarah froze. Sister, Seraphina. Lachlan whispered the name like a prayer. He sat down heavily on a dust-sheeted chair, burying his face in his hands. She was the runt of our litter. The only girl. She was like you. Soft, kind, an omega who didn't like to fight. Kieran stepped closer to Sarah, the anger draining out of him, leaving him looking exhausted. 10 years ago, our father, who was a cruel, power-hungry man, tried to trade her to a southern pack for territory. Serafina refused. She tried to run. He hunted her. Aemon continued, his voice devoid of emotion, which was more terrifying than shouting. Our own father. He hunted her down like a deer. We were on patrol. We didn't get there in time. When we found her, it was too late. Sarah covered her mouth, horror washing over her. We killed him, Kieran said flatly. That night, we tore our father apart for what he did to her. That is how we became the Alphas. Not by ambition, by vengeance. Kieran reached out, finally bridging the gap, and cupped Sarah's tear-stained face. We didn't choose you because you look like her, Sarah. We chose you because when we saw your file, we recognized the same light in your eyes that she had. The light that the world tries to stomp out. We failed to protect Serafina. We swore on our souls we would never fail again. You are not a replacement, Lachlan said, looking up with red-rimmed eyes. You are our second chance at having a heart. Sarah looked at the brothers, these terrifying monsters of the north, and saw them for what they truly were. Broken boys, trying to keep a fragile thing safe. The doubt Jessica planted withered and died instantly. I'm sorry, Sarah whispered, leaning into Kieran's touch. I'm so sorry. Don't be, Kieran murmured, pulling her into his chest. Aemon and Lachlan joined them, creating a protective circle around her, just like they had done for Serafina in the photo. But Jessica, Sarah mumbled into Kieran's coat. Why did she lie? Because your mother is terrified, Aemon said, adjusting his glasses. Regina knows that if we fully claim you, if we mark you, her hold over you is gone forever. Legally, spiritually, and politically. She sent Jessica to stall us. Kieran pulled back, looking down at Sarah with intense gravity. She was right about one thing, though. We haven't marked you. We were waiting for you to be ready, to be sure. Sarah looked at the three of them. She saw their devotion, she saw their pain, and she saw her future. I'm sure, she said, softly. The air in the room changed. The static electricity of the bond spiked. Are you certain? Lachlan asked, his eyes darkening to black. Once we bite, there is no going back. You are ours, and we are yours. Your mother can scream to the high heavens, but she will never be able to touch you again. Do it, Sarah commanded, finding her own alpha voice for the first time. Mark me. Kieran didn't hesitate. He tilted her head back, exposing the sensitive curve of her neck, where her scent gland pulsed. He traced the vein with his tongue, sending a jolt of fire through her body. Mine, he growled. He sank his teeth into her skin. It wasn't pain. It was a golden explosion of light. Sarah gasped as the bond snapped into place, a massive permanent bridge connecting her soul to theirs. She felt Lachlan's wild protectiveness, Aemon's steady intellect, and Kieran's fierce possessiveness flood her mind. She wasn't alone anymore. She would never be alone again. But as the euphoria settled and the brothers held her up, the satellite phone in Kieran's pocket began to ring. It was a harsh, jarring sound in the sacred silence. Kieran ignored it. It rang again, and again. Finally, with a growl, he answered it. This had better be an emergency. He listened for a moment, his face turning to stone. He looked at Sarah, his eyes filled with a new, dangerous urgency. It's the council, Kieran said, ending the call. Regina has filed a formal petition. She claims you are mentally incompetent and that we kidnapped you. She's invoking the Vulnerable Omega Act." "She's what?" Sarah asked, her blood running cold. "She's trying to commit you to a sanatorium, Sarah," Kieran said. "And because she filed the paperwork 10 minutes before we marked you, the mark might not be legally recognized yet." The grand hall of the Alpha Council in Central City was a cold, sterile room of polished mahogany and judgment. Sarah sat on one side, flanked by her mates. On the other sat Regina, looking immaculate in a white suit, playing the role of the grieving, concerned mother to perfection. "We are here to discuss the petition regarding the competency of Sarah Miller." High Elder Thomas droned, looking bored. Regina stood, sliding a thick file across the table. "My daughter is unwell, High Elder. She suffers from severe body dysmorphia and delusional episodes. She believes these men, the Blackwood Alphas, love her. It is a fantasy. I believe they kidnapped her to secure a border alliance, taking advantage of a vulnerable, mentally unstable girl." She looked at Sarah with pity that felt like a slap. "I am petitioning for an emergency conservatorship. She needs to be placed in the Serenity Hills facility until she is manageable." Kieran's hand tightened on the table, the wood creaking under his grip. But it was Eamon who stood up. He didn't look angry. He looked bored. He adjusted his glasses and opened a laptop. "Regina mentions a conservatorship," Eamon said, his voice calm, "but she omits the financial context." "This is a custody hearing, not a bank audit," Regina's lawyer snapped. "It is when the petitioner is bankrupt," Eamon countered. He turned the laptop around. "I audited the Silver Lake accounts this morning. Regina has gambled away the PAC's treasury. The only asset remaining is Sarah's trust fund, which unlocks fully if Sarah marries, or if she is declared incapacitated and Regina is named guardian." The room went deadly silent. Regina's mask slipped. "This isn't about mental health," Eamon said coldly. "Sarah isn't a daughter to you. She is a line of credit." "Lies!" Regina shrieked, her composure shattering. "You dirty northern savage. She is sick. She is weak. I am not weak." Sarah stood up. She didn't tremble this time. She closed her eyes, pulling on half the bond she shared with the triplets. She felt Kieran's strength, Lachlan's fire, and Eamon's mind. When she opened her eyes, they weren't violet anymore. They were glowing, a blinding feral silver. The pressure in the room dropped. The council members flinched, their inner wolves, baring their throats instinctively. It was the aura of a lunar supreme, a force of nature. Sarah walked around the table, stopping inches from her mother. Regina shrank back, looking terrified for the first time in her life. "You called me heavy," Sarah said, her voice resonating with power that rattled the water pitchers. "You were right. I am heavy, because I carry the weight of the crown you were never strong enough to wear." She leaned in, her silver eyes burning. "The trust fund is mine. My mates are mine. And if you ever come near us again, I won't sue you, Mother. I will hunt you." Regina scrambled back, clutching her chest. "Case dismissed," the High Elder croaked, looking pale. "The mating is recognized. The conservatorship is denied." Regina didn't argue. She fled the room, her heels clicking frantically on the marble. Sarah watched her go, then collapsed into Kieran's arms, the adrenaline fading. They had won the legal battle, but as they walked out, Sarah felt a shiver of dread. A narcissist like Regina didn't accept defeat. She only escalated the war. The victory at the council felt hollow. As they returned to the Blackwood estate, the air was thick with dread. Regina wasn't the type to accept a legal loss. She would burn the board before admitting defeat. That night, the attack didn't come with a declaration of war. It came with the sound of shattering glass. At 3:00 a.m., canisters crashed through the master suite's floor-to-ceiling window, spewing thick yellow gas. "Wolfsbane, don't breathe," Lachlan roared, but it was too late. The triplets, with their enhanced alpha senses and rapid metabolisms, absorbed the toxin instantly. They collapsed, retching their limbs, seizing up in paralysis. Sarah, with her slower omega metabolism, only felt dizzy. She scrambled out of bed as the door kicked open. Regina walked in. She wore a gas mask and held a heavy revolver. Behind her stood mercenaries in tactical gear. "Pathetic," Regina sneered, her voice muffled by the mask. She stepped over Eamon's convulsing body to aim the gun at Kieran's head. The kings of the north reduced to drooling puppies. "Leave them alone," Sarah screamed, grabbing a heavy brass lamp. Regina laughed coldly. "Or what you'll sit on me goodbye, Kieran?" She began to squeeze the trigger. Sarah didn't think. She didn't try to shift. She simply launched herself. She used the very weight Regina had mocked for decades as a weapon, tackling her mother with the force of a battering ram. They hit the floor hard. The gun skittered across the room. Regina's mask was knocked askew. "Get off me, you fat cow!" Regina shrieked, clawing at Sarah's face. "I am not a cow," Sarah snarled, pinning Regina's throat with her forearm. Her eyes glowed a blinding, lethal silver. "I am the Luna of this pack, and you are trespassing." Sarah slammed Regina's head against the floorboards. Once. Twice. Regina went limp, unconscious. Sarah stood up, chest heaving, blood dripping from a scratch on her cheek. She glared at the mercenaries, her aura exploding outward like a shockwave. "Leave," she roared, "or I will let the pack eat you alive." Outside, the thunderous howling of 200 angry wolves signaled the arrival of the pack guards. The mercenaries fled into the night, leaving their employer broken on the floor. The northern snow had finally melted, replaced by a carpet of wildflowers. Sarah sat on the porch swing, sketching in her notebook. The view was perfect. Lachlan was wrestling with the pack's dogs in the grass. Eamon was managing the grill, wearing a kiss the cook apron. Kieran was sitting on the railing next to her, his hand resting possessively on the high swell of her stomach. "They're kicking again," Kieran murmured, feeling the movement beneath his palm. Sarah laughed, covering his hand with hers. "Multiple heartbeats." Kieran grinned, his amber eyes soft. "Blackwoods don't do anything by halves." Sarah smiled, looking out at her territory. Regina was serving a life sentence in a maximum security ward. The Silver Lake refugees were safe, and Sarah, the girl who had spent 22 years apologizing for taking up space, finally understood the truth. She wasn't too big. She was just full of life. And now, surrounded by her 3 monsters and carrying their future, she was exactly the right size to hold it all. And that is the story of Tsura and the Blackwood triplets. Regina thought she was discarding a broken toy, but she ended up forging a diamond. It's a reminder that the very things people criticize you for, your size, your softness, your emotions, might actually be your greatest strengths in the right environment. Sarah wasn't weak. She was just planted in the wrong soil. Once she found her true pack, she didn't just survive, she bloomed. What did you think of Sarah's revenge? Do you think Regina got what she deserved, or should the punishment have been harsher? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single theory. If you enjoyed this story, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow, and don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss a new romance drama. I've got a story coming next week about a rogue alpha who falls for a human librarian, and trust me, you don't want to miss that one. Thanks for listening, and until next time, keep howling.